Welcome, welcome. We're going to kick this off and try to get this through quick. So the first thing says, explain the pressure volume curve for a single cardiac cycle. So the pressure volume curve represents the changes in pressure and volume in the left ventricle during one heartbeat. So over here, I have drawn out already a little bit about the volume and the pressure that's going on in the heart, just in the ventricles. Well, I also drew the atrium along with the aortic, but we're going to ignore those for as we discuss the ventricles. So over here, as the ventricle is going to fill a little bit as the atrium contracts, and the pressure is going to increase due to that contraction. Once we reach this point here, our mitral valve is going to close, so that way the pressure can build up in the ventricle, allowing it to push past the next valve. And we see that buildup occurring, so it increases and increases until it hits this point where the aortic valve opens up. Whenever that aortic valve opens up, the pressure is still going to continue to increase a little bit, but this is whenever it's going to push the blood through the aortic valve, the semilunar valve, causing it to pass the aorta and dispersing it through the body. And we call that phase the ejection phase. And I'll go through what each A, B, C, D, and D mean here in a second. So once we reach about, this curve more looks about right there, where the dichrotic notch meets the pressure of the ventricle, the aortic valve is going to close, and once it does, the ventricle is going to continue to relax until you reach about here. Then the mitral valve is going to open, allowing the ventricle to start passively filling with blood. And as we see, and then as this is occurring, as the time is going, we see the volume in the left ventricle start to increase a little bit passively. But then we have it starting getting the last 20 to 30% from the atrium, and then it starts to lose its blood after the ventricles contract, and then we have that inflow again. Where the ventricles start filling up again. And so just going over what this A, B, C, and D mean. So the A here is the ventricle filling. B is the isovolumic contraction. It means that the heart is contracting, but the ventricles are contracting, but it's not increasing or decreasing volume. C is going to be our ejection phase, where we're dispersing the blood past the aortic valve and spreading it through the rest of the body. And D is going to be isovolumic relaxation, allowing the ventricle to relax before the next relaxation. Allowing the ventricle to relax before it starts filling again. And between here, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about the pressure volume curve in the left ventricle. So we see here again that we have our A, B, C, and D, which is our ventricle filling, isovolumic contraction, ejection, and isovolumic relaxation that we talked about. So our ventricle is going to start with around 50 milliliters of blood in it, and it's going to start a little bit of pressure as well. It's not going to start at zero. And so whenever it starts to fill up, it starts to increase in pressure very slowly until the mitral valve closes. And whenever it does, the ventricle is going to contract until it reaches enough pressure to be able to push open the semilunar valve, which then leads us into our ejection phase. Once it does that, then once the blood leaves enough, the semilunar valve will close, allowing the ventricle to relax, preparing for the filling, which is going to happen down here at this point where the mitral valve opens up and happens again. And usually you can build up enough pressure with 120 milliliters in the ventricle. So you generally have around stroke volume of 70, because between these two, between your isovolumic relaxation and the isovolumic contraction, that is around 70 milliliters, and that is going to be your stroke volume. And we know that your stroke volume is your EDV, your end diastolic volume, minus your end systolic volume, which I talk a little bit about that down there. And just talking a little bit about the inotropic line, is that's the contractile strength of the heart independent of preload. And we know that as inotropy increases, so does the stroke volume. And we'll see a little bit more about that here in just a minute. And so over here I drew just a couple. Oh, actually I want to touch on preload and afterload real quick. So preload is going to be the blood getting to the heart. And so we see the preload going to be about right. Oh, 1 second. Come on. The preload is going to be about right here. Sorry. Preload is going to be about right here, while the afterload is going to be right here. And so with that being said, I'm going to I'm going to describe a couple things that are going to happen. And so if you just something real quick is if you change your ionotropic line, it's going to increase in stiffness if it increases, or decrease if it gets shallower. So the more steep the line, the more stiff your heart is, which can cause problems in the future, because then your heart is having to put forth more work to get blood to the body, and the calcium is remaining within the cytoplasm, and so that means something is going on that shouldn't be, and so your body wants to return to homeostasis. You got to do something to fix that. All right, just going a little bit over here is talking about preload and afterload. Once if you increase your afterload, sorry, over here I talk about preload, down here I talk about afterload. If you increase your preload, as we see here, that this is actually a preload. I needed to correct myself. So that's your preload, and that's your afterload. If you increase your preload, you're going to increase the amount of volume that the ventricle is holding if you're keeping the same inotropic line. So that means your volume is going to increase within your heart. We're just going to even put it right there. And so one way that we can help increase our preload to our heart by increasing the volume is by laying down. This allows more blood to be able to reach into our heart as long as we're flat, not at an angle. If if we're at an angle, it'll change that. Because our legs are up, and so we're getting blood not only from our head and limbs, but we're also getting more blood that we would normally get from our legs. And so if we decrease our preload, we see that the volume decreases, which means that our heart is going to push out a smaller amount. So we want to always be looking at that, see where our inotropic line is, and find out if we're increasing or decreasing our preload. And then if we increase or decrease our afterload, it will also affect the volume, but it'll mainly affect the pressure, as we see here. As you see in the preload, if you're changing it, the pressure isn't changing much. But as we see here, with the normal inotropic line, if we increase our afterload, then we're going to have less volume. And if we decrease our afterload, it's going to decrease our volume. So they're directly related. As we see right there. Talked a little bit about that and how the heart is moving there. Just want to go through some equations real quick. We talked about stroke volume being your end diastolic minus your end systolic. Cardiac output is going to be your heart rate, so the amount of times your heart beats times your stroke volume, the amount in your ventricles. Something also to be aware of is the more calcium that you have in your cytoplasm means that you're going to have a steeper inotropic line. Alrighty, so we explained the pressure for the volumes curve for a single cardiac cycle. We included inotropy, afterload, and preload, so let's go ahead and talk about the baroreceptor reflex. So over here, we have a baroreceptor. The baroreceptor reflex is a rapid negative feedback loop that helps maintain mean arterial pressure, which we're going to talk about up here in just a minute. So what happens is there's a couple places in which they are located, such as the top of the aorta, and in these places called the carotid sinuses, or carotid sinuses. And they detect changes in blood pressure by detecting the stretch that the blood is being pumped into here. So if blood is being pumped in here really fast and it stretches this a bit more, it's going to detect that. Or if it increases stretch here or here, it's going to tell the brain to give a response in order to counteract what's happening and maintain homeostasis. And the control center up here with the medulla, which is right next to the brain, which is a part of the brain, it's going to receive signals and send signals back to the heart, telling it to not pump blood through as hard by either let me just get this right. So the baroreceptors stretch, say blood is coming in too much, so it sends a signal to the medulla, and it comes back to the heart, and the heart's like, oh, I need to send less blood. And so they're going to try to limit that by pumping slower, so that way it's not sending blood out as fast, is what that's going to do. So it's going to decrease your heart rate there. And so, yeah, after explaining that, we're going to explain the variables that regulate your mean arterial pressure. And then we already explained how the baroreceptor reflex works, because it already asked about that there. So with the variables that regulate mean arterial pressure, we first want to find out what mean arterial pressure is. So what this is it's the pressure within the arteries and things where it flows out out to the body and then back to the heart. So all through the vessels. So it starts out with the aorta, which is where the pressure is going to be highest. And then it's going to be lowest in the right heart, where it returns. And as this does this, the pressure decreases on what you can slope a line on a normal slope about that. But because our pressure constantly changes and is making up for different losses and gains, it's fluctuating. And that curve best fits that fluctuation. So our pressure is going to be highest in our aorta, and then our arteries, and then the arterioles, and then capillaries, venules, veins, and then the right heart. And our map is generally around 65, and we pass out if it gets lower, because in the skull we have a mean arterial pressure, a pressure of 50, that the mean arterial pressure has to get past. And if it can't get past that, then we're not going to get blood to the brain, and we're going to lose oxygen, and then you pass out. And so our mean arterial pressure is going to be our diastolic pressure plus a third of our systolic, plus a third of times our systolic pressure plus our diastolic pressure. Along with that, another equation that we want to memorize is that our mean arterial pressure equals our cardiac output times our peripheral resistance. And our peripheral resistance is going to equal 8 times the viscosity times the length over pi r to the 4th power. And our flow rate, just another equation to keep in mind, is our pressure 1 minus pressure 2 over peripheral resistance. Alrighty. So we talked a little bit about the variables that regulate MAP, explaining the baroreceptors and how it works. Next up, we're going to explain the mechanism by which fluids normally move out and in of capillaries. We're going to also describe the effects of various forces, such as hydrostatic and osmotic pressure, and how these forces differ at the arterial and venous ends of the capillaries. So moving down here, I increased the size of this image. I'm actually going to increase it a little more, just so that way we can, because I drew it so small to begin with, and I was like, I just want to make this bigger. Alrighty, so here we have our capillary. That's this part in green. And we're going to have the arterial end, which over here we have our arterial end. This is our arterial. This is our venule. And on our arterial end, we're going to have this sphincter. It's called the precapillary sphincter. It's what controls the blood flow from entering into our capillaries at too high of a pressure that would burst our capillaries, which would be very bad. So With this being said, blood is entering into our capillaries, and we are having something called hydrostatic pressure. And hydrostatic pressure is going to be the pressure that pushes fluid out, but it doesn't control the movement of water, because the movement of water, H2O, is going to be based on the solutes that are within the capillary and without the capillary. And so it's pushing out other fluids. It's helping push out fluids. And with the hydrostatic pressure, we have around 30 milligrams. Nope, it should be 28 milligrams. No, that's the B cup. My bad. Sorry. So, sorry, just going through something else over here. And so the solute, we're going to have 30 milligrams of the hydrostatic pressure, and it's going to push stuff out of the capillary. Then we have what we call our blood colloid proteins, and that is going to consist of albumin, fibrinogen, clotting proteins, complement, hormone proteins, enzymes, etc. And those are going to allow the water to flow into the cell, into the capillary, at a pressure of 28 millimeters per mercury. And then we also have some proteins on the outside, which we're gonna call this pressure ICOP, which is the interstitial colloid osmotic pressure. And that is going to be around 8 millimeters of mercury. And that's going to move fluid out that way. Then we have our IFP, which is going to move fluid out, but it's not going to move fluid out by normal means. We have these these lymphs right here, these lymph vessels. And these lymph vessels are going to basically create a vacuum pressure that's going to move fluid out just due to the vacuum pressure itself. So it sucks things out. And that's going to have a pressure of about 3 millimeters of mercury. And so as we see here, blood, and as we add up all of our pressures here, we're going to end up with about 13 millimeters of mercury moving out. And that's with the arterial end of the capillary right here. Here, let me use the highlighter. That's with the arterial end right here. In the venial end of the capillary, the hydrostatic pressure is going to change. So the amount of the fluid in there, of fluid moving through here, is going to be a lot lower. So we're going to say that we have around 10 millimeters per mercury of hydrostatic pressure, which then we have to add up all the others, and it gets us the 10 minus the 28 plus the 8, plus the 8 minus plus the 3, which is going to get us to around 7 millimeters negative of mercury, and that's in. Because if it was positive, it'd be out. And I just made that minus because it was in. So with that, that's how each of these are working. Our hydrostatic pressure, our blood colloid, our interstitial colloid osmotic pressure, and our interstitial fluid pressure, IFP. And so continuing with this is we talked a little bit about what's going on here and how things are moving. Now let's say we have, well, now we're going to talk a little bit about edema, which is what it wants us to talk right here. It says give one example of edema and how it is caused. So with edema, basically what's happening is your lymph is not able to make up for the extra pressure, the extra fluids that are building up outside. And so it's going to create a bubble in your skin. We're just going to call this your skin. It's going to start to create a bubble in your skin due to the fluid pressure pushing on it, because there's more and more going out. So some of the things that are causing this are things that will increase the hydrostatic pressure and the hydrostatic pressure increasing, and things that will increase the things coming out. So if you have your heart not working properly, it can cause this. Or if you're if you're increasing hydrostatic pressure, it'll cause it. Or if you're decreasing your interstitial colloid osmotic pressure, it can cause that. Or along with blood B-cop, if you increase that, it'll also do that, which this one is very common by causing an edema through inflammation, through burns, it will react in accordance to that. Or even if you damage your lymph vessels over here, then you can still not make up for the pressure, and that'll also cause that bulging to occur. So that is edema right there, and I hope you enjoyed this video.